Now, to do the ESC pins, we're going to, and sort of to go over again, we're going to use these three, and we're going to use these three, which is the signals and the signal, positive and negative off the first ESC. So looking at the pins we have here, we can mix and match and cut and bend to make this work. So what I like to do is I take this 2x3, and that's going to go into the first two, and that's going to cover these ones here. Then we take one of these guys, just the 1x2, and that's going to go into there. So that covers your 4 signals. It covers the positive and negative of your BSC, of your first ESC. And these are your vertical pins. But we can use a needle nose plier and bend them into right angles, which gives you a lower profile than this right angle pins. So let's clear our workspace. Oh, before we do that, we're also going to need this, which is the 2x3 double stack thing, and that's going to cover our telemetry, the battery, and the buzzer pins. So that's what we need from there. Plus, we're going to need the 2x, or no, sorry, that's the wrong one. That was the 3. The 2x6. Nope. Can't count right now. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 2x5, and that's going to go onto there. So these are all the pins we need at this moment, which is that one, the right angle, 3x2, and the 1x2. So everything else we're going to put away, and I'm going to put away the one that's already finished. Okay, so let's do that one last. I find these ones a little bit the hardest to do, so we'll put them on the side for now. That one's really easy, this guy, because you don't have to do any bending. And these ones we will have to bend and to make it work. Now grab a needle nose, and we're going to have to bend this 90 degrees. So I find it easier just to do them one at a time. And the pins are pretty strong. I've yet to snap one by doing this. And just slowly get them in. Okay, so we've got a right angle. Let's test it with the plug. Okay, one sec here. It's sort of twisted on me. Okay, so there it is, plugged in. Now that is going to fit into there, like that. So from the side, you can see it's going to fit like that. Now to solder this in, we are going to take, because the hardest part with soldering these pins is that, you know, they're moving, right? So we're going to first take the soldering tip. We're going to add a dab of solder to the tip. We're going to position the header or the pins just in the right angle that we like, and we're going to make contact to the pin. Okay. Now, if we look at this solder, it's not the final solder. It's dull in color, and it hasn't made bond with the pad and the pin. But really, I'm just using it sort of like to tack it in. And with that, it's on much better, right? So instead of having to jiggle with it and keep it steady while you solder, I use that method just to get it firmly in place. Now, we are going to solder the pin for real. And some people use like the helping hand to hold it in place with the clips. I just sort of rested on a foam pad. Now, this is a two-handed operation because you need the soldering iron tip and you also need your solder. And what we're doing is we are touching the solder onto the pin, and by doing that you're transferring the heat through the tip onto the pin, and because the pin is also touching the pad is getting hot as well. And through transfer of heat, when we touch the solder onto either the pin or the pad, the solder will melt. And so what we do is with our soldering tip, we hold it onto the pin, and after it's heated through, we feed the solder through. And by using that motion of the pushing onto the pad, we are melting the solder directly onto the pad. And if done well, it will fully cover around the pad. So that's the idea of what's going to happen. Now, something that someone taught me when I learned to solder was that heat transfers better if it's got a little bit of solder on the tip. So rather than just putting the tip directly onto bare metal, it makes a better heat transfer if the tip of your soldering iron already has a bit of solder on it. Now, it doesn't have to be a lot, but just enough so that the solder is in between the contact point of the tip of the solder iron and wherever you're going to solder, right? So we're first going to, well, you always have to have a clean tip to begin, so I'm going to clean it first using a sponge or other cleaning thing that you have. I use one of these things from a really cool company, Hacko. So that's what I use, and you just stab it. The sponge, I was told that because it's a wet sponge, it drops the temperature of your iron every time you clean your tip. So then, after you do that, you have to wait till the iron goes back up to temperature. So again, we've got the soldering tip, we've got the solder on our other hand, and we're going to use that to feed it. And before we make contact, we are going to apply the solder onto the tip, and just enough, just a dab, so it's a contact transfer point. So we touch the pen, and we use the solder Okay, just a sec. I need a little more solder. See, that's the problem, is that there was not enough solder on the tip to transfer the heat directly, because I was trying to feed the solder onto that pad, but it wasn't melting because there wasn't a good enough heat transfer. So I'm going to put a little bit more solder. But see, that's another problem that happens, is that if your soldering iron isn't clean, that it has another amount of solder on it, it just sort of balls up, and that's not a good thing. So let's clean the tip again. Now I'm going to melt some solder on the tip again, but this time a little more. Okay, so that's a good amount. Now, I use that as the contact point, and I'm going to feed the solder in, and then I lift up. Okay, clean your tip. I'm going to look at the solder point, and it looks pretty good. It's got a nice shine to it. It's covered all of the pad, and I'm quite happy with that. So remember the first pin we had used just to tack on the pins. So that's not a good solder yet. Now a trick to fix that is we use the flux paste. And I like to keep a brush labeled flux, because this is what I'm going to use to apply flux. Now you paint the flux over the solder of any cold joints, and that's what is referred to when there is not a good solder bond. And it's evident because the solder is like hazy, it's got a dull finish, it's not shiny. So after we applied the flux, we get our soldering tip again, make sure it's clean. Again, we're going to apply a little bit of solder to the tip, and we're going to touch the cold solder joint, and then we lift up. So what that's done is that it's melted the solder much better onto that contact point, and it becomes very shiny, and that is a really nice solder job. So we turn it around, and now these two pins are finished, and those are going to be the signal wire for 3 and 4 ESC. So our next step is to attach the next pins, which is for ESC1 BEC and ESC2 signal wire. Now this is where it's sort of optional, where you can keep these two pins, but we don't need them, right? Because we only need one BEC for an ESC. So I'm going to actually take those out. And these pins are actually just applied sort of with pressure within the nylon casing here. So you can pull the pins out. So using a needle nose, I can pull out the two that I don't need anymore. And see, they just slide right out. Now don't discard these, because I'll show you where they will come in handy. So we've taken out those pins. Okay, so I've gone ahead and bent the pins so that it's got the shape we want, and we're ready to solder. So if we put that over the board just like that, you get sort of an idea of what the end product's going to be. And it's pretty awesome. It's pretty exciting. So again, what we do is we hold it in place, and while holding that with your finger, I get my soldering tip. I load, okay, let's get that in frame. I load the solder onto the tip, and you're going to have more than you need for just a heat transfer. And you're going to apply that on one of the pins. Now what that does is that, again, it's going to just tack the pins on, so it's now on. It's not a good solder, remember? We fixed that at the end, but it's now on, and that's the important thing. So let's clean our tip and get ready for applying the solder properly. So let's get back our foam, and we're going to be doing these here. This is the one we just tacked on, which we'll have to fix. So remember, it's holding it on the pin and then feeding. Where's my solder? Okay. And then feeding by touching it onto the pad. So I've cleaned my tip. And I'm going to load the solder on because it helps with heat transfer, right? Make contact. So while it's touching the pen, it's warming up everything, and then we feed, and then we pull back. Okay? Don't bother cleaning your tip if you're going to be using it again. There's solder on there, it's good to go. So touch the next pin, and we feed and let go. We touch another pin, we feed, and then let go. Now, since the tack on the first one isn't that much of a solder, let's, instead of doing the other method we did, let's just fix it up by applying solder. So we touch the pin, and we feed, and then we let go. Okay, let's clean our tip. So, with every solder, you want to inspect the solder, and we have really nice shiny contact. Looks really good. Alright, so we're ready to move on, which is doing these here using the same way. And remember, this is the one that has the pre-bent one, so I'll just go ahead and do that. I'll turn off the camera. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've soldered on this. Remember, it's handy to put the connector on, just so that you get the clearance right when you're installing the pins. Now this one, so the solder looks good. Of course, this one here looks dull, right? And it has that pointy shape, which I don't like, and that's not a good solder. But this was the tack point, right? To hold the pins in while I soldered, so that's not supposed to be a good solder right away. So this one, because it has quite a generous amount of tack, we do the first method, which we did, which is we take the flex, too much on there, we brush over the solder point, we take the tip, clean the tip, then we're going to load a little bit of solder, and we're going to touch that point. And it's now a good solder point. It's shiny, and it's perfect. So there we go. So we've got those pins hooked in. So what we have got left is this one here. And this one is a bit challenging one, just because it's sort of a long solder area. And okay, and there's a lot of work to this one. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to apply some flux on the pads, and we're going to brush those on. Then we take the solder and we're going to load some on the solder tip. Okay, I'm going to use the foam again. We're going to load some on the solder tip, and we're going to touch the pad. And by doing that, we are pre-tinning the pads. Now this is very important for making the best solder connection. Okay, so we've done that. I cleaned the tip. Now we flip it over and we've got some more pads, right? So we get, remember the flux that I use, I take a brush and I load up the brush. Okay, so we've got some flux. Again, okay, too much on there, I'm gonna rub it off. I don't want big, deep, like gobs of it on the brush because we just need a very minimal amount. And we're gonna paint the pads again with flux. Okay, once that's done, we get our soldering tip, we clean it, we are going to load some on the tip again, and we touch on the pad, load some more, touch the pad, load some more, touch the pad, load some more, touch the pad, load some more, and the last pad. So that's done. Let's clean our tip. So we need to put this onto here. So we're going to do a dry test. We're going to slide that over. Now, depending on how much tinning of the pads you did, you may need to spread or compress the pins to make it a nice fit, because right now it's on there pretty well, right? Okay, and that's quite nice. Now, okay, so before we do that, I'm gonna have to do some illustrations. And this is a really good concept for all soldering, because basically you've got a contact point, and by tinning, we're going to add some solder. Then we have another contact point, and this is the pin, right? So that's going to go down and make contact and rest on the tinned solder. We are then going to apply heat with the solder point, the solder iron tip, which is going to, remember, have some solder on the tip for better transfer. Now, when we make contact with this pin, what's happening is the heat is being transferred onto the solder, or onto the pin, and the solder is helping that heat transfer. And then the heat is transferring to the pin, then the pin is heating the solder, and the solder melts and coats the pin and the pad, and everything becomes a shiny, nice solder. And that's the proper way to solder. So you've got your pad, you're going to have, essentially it's going to look like this. You're going to have your pin resting on top, and after you make contact, you're going to release the solder that's tinned in the middle, and it's going to come out and it's going to wrap everything and become amazing. And that's what we're aiming for. So let's get back to that. So here we have it. This is the tricky one because the pins are so close together. So if you've got too much solder, it's going to bleed out, and that's really, really bad. And we can fix it. I'm probably not going to cover it in this video. Well, if I mess up, then I'll have to cover it, right? Because I hate using, basically what you use is, where is it? Where did I put that? It's a wick. and it's got copper wire and it's got flux in there, and you put that over solder and you heat it and the solder gets stuck to that. So to remove excess solder we need to use something like this. I'm not that good with that right now. I can use it, but it's not a easy process and it's not fun. It's one of the things I detest about soldering is removing solder. So tip, it's clean. We load some tiny bit of solder onto the tip for transferring heat. Then we touch and we hold and we keep holding. Okay, and that did not work because there was just not enough solder to transfer the heat properly. It didn't actually melt the tinning, so let's try that again. And there we go. You can see that the solder has melted, and if you look at it close, you can see that it's fully wrapped around the contact point. So let's keep going. Load up the solder tip, touch the point. Oh, that one worked really well. Okay, let's go again. Nice. My hands are a little shaky as I'm getting older. It's a funny thing. Okay, let's do this. Nice. Okay, I like that. Okay, really nice. Okay, same principle here. And remember, I'm doing a PWM setup, so I need all 8 contacts for my breakout cable. Now, after I'm finished this, I'll show you the PPM setup again. And really, you can do this PWM extra pins and still run a PPM and just use the first 3. But if you want like a clean build, I don't know if it does make it that much cleaner. You can be the judge, right? So those are done. Looking at it, I love the solder connection. It looks really nice. So I'll show you the difference. This is using all 8 and it's the PWM, and this is the PPM for only using the first 3. So on this board, which is for a customer of mine, I only put in the 3 pins. But what I've done is I've used the pins on the bottom and soldered those on for stability, because if it didn't have that and it only had the 3 on the top, because there's a lot of torque on here, so if your wire or the connector, and I'll demonstrate by plugging one in, if it pushed up, it's a lot of torque placed on these 3 pins. So to counteract that, I've put in the 3 bottom ones, but if you could notice, the top of the pins are missing. And that's why I had asked you when we pulled out these pins to save them, because you can actually cut them and put them back in. And I'll demonstrate that with some pins that I'm not using. So this guy here, I'm not going to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it out. So I removed the pin, right? So one's missing. And I'm going to use cutters. And I'm going to cut the pin kind of around in the half point. Now, do it over a container. So what I do is I hold onto the pin I'm saving, and it's going to shoot that way. So I do it over a bucket. So if we look at this now, okay, let me pick it up. it's now shorter. And holding it firmly in needle nose, I can reinsert it Okay, wait, the orientation. Okay, I can reinsert it. To create the flesh pin and ready for soldering. So that's how I did this one on the PPM, was cut those pins, well first remove them, cut the pins, put them back in, and soldered. So that gives it a very nice firm connection from here and to there. Now someone could be really anal and say, well, you know, those are now live, what are you going to do about that, right? You can use electric tape if you want, or liquid tape, and cover those tips, but really when you're dealing with a circuit board that is all live, it's nothing to worry about, really. But if you are that type of person, sure, you can coat those dead points there, or live points, to make them dead using liquid tape. So that is the video. Naze just started up one. What was that, like 20 minutes or so that went by? Took longer because I'm narrating it. Once you get the hang of these, they can be done really fast, and it's fun. And every time I do this, it gets a little bit better, and I'm excited for this one. And that's gonna go into my Epic 260, so excited about that. So thanks for watching.